Hey everybody, what is going on? Alex here, and I'm back for another video. And today I've got a new video. So now, of course, we're in a different format. Ban list came out, and game has kind of changed a little bit. It hasn't been a big list, but we kind of in a bit of a different format slightly now. So these are going to be my opinions on the best decks and cards that will be popular, and some cards to watch out for that weren't exactly popular, but actually might be very good this format. Also, I'm going to be going over some budget decks at the end, so if you want to see some budget decks, make sure to have a look at through this video. Also, if you could smash that thumbs up button and subscribe for more content, that would be much, much appreciated. We're near 100 subscribers, and that'd be really, really meaningful to me if we could hit that. So, without further ado, let's go straight onto the video. So, there is a bit of a weird meta at the moment. So starting at the first one, we have Paleozoic. And of course, Paleos are no question the best deck at the moment. They didn't get touched on the list at all. And, we're at a stage where it's like, Toad is still absolutely busted and out of control. And I think at the end of this format, it could get limited or even banned, in my opinion. It's just a very, very effective card that is able to recycle itself. So number one is Paleozoic in the meta. Next up, we have ZODIAC. ZODIAC would be, I would say, maybe first or second if Rapier was not at 1, but at 2. But now Rapier is at 2. The deck has lost a bit more consistency, and it's still an effective deck, very strong, but not as splashable as it was before. And that's what they took away. They took away the splashability of this deck, and I really, really am grateful for that because, it was bloody boring to play against this deck. Next up, we've got Invocations or Invokers, Eidolons, and these are tending to play with artifacts and, of course, Wind Witches. This deck is very, very good and very effective. So if you do have this deck, I would have a look at involving the Wind Witches if you do not use them. And again, the reason why this deck is just so good is it's because it's a fresh deck. It's a deck that hasn't been touched, effective, but I don't think it's going to get hit on the ban list because, like, the reason why is because, it's a fresh deck and it could be power crept really quickly. Next up is we've got these 60 card decks that are using the grass looks greener. These are like Infernoids, other decks. I know loads of decks are using 60 cards. It's a very, very different type of deck that use these ones, but it's a very strong deck actually. And I think this is one of the best, most interesting decks that they've ever released, and I like this. I like this sort of deck. But this is just looking at the meta. We're going to look at some cards that counters every single one of these decks. So we're going to start off with D Barrier, and D Barrier is pretty much going to be the card that, if you're playing competitively, I'd highly recommend you always play this at 3 or side 1 at least, because this deck is just so effective in just stunning your opponent. It's a really good floodgate, and now that Vanity's Emptiness is gone and Maxi is at 1, we are losing all these floodgates, and D-Barrier is going to be the most effective one. So we're going to look at Paleozoic first, and this deck is by far a big pain into looking at, and we're going to be having a look at some cards that can really, really beat this deck. So firstly, we're going to have a look at DENKO SEKKA. Of course, DENKO SEKKA is the pretty much the king of stunning Paleozoic. It allows us to prevent our opponent from using trap cards, and really, really, really just stuns our opponent until they can get rid of this card. It's just a good card to side. I'd always recommend siding 2, never 3, because you don't really want to always open this card in your first hand. Because if you go first and this card is in your hand, it's kind of a waste. So I'd always recommend playing 2, or siding them at least, because this card is really, really effective. Just allows us to stun our opponent, and it does really well. But our cards to watch out for actually goes to Skill Drain and Majesty's Fiend. And the reason for this is because it just allows us to kill the board on the field. And by killing the board on the field, it makes Toad useless and all these cards, and allows us to actually summon cards that can run over, which leads over to my deck to watch out for. My deck to watch out for actually goes to Kaiju Trains. And the reason for this is because Skill Drain does very well in this deck, and allows us to summon these 3k beaters like Heavy Freight Train Derricrane, Night Express Knight, and can really just run over all these cards like Toad. Sure, Toad can recycle itself from the graveyard, but really does very well. And I really like this sort of deck because it just allows us to completely run over, and actually doesn't have to worry about the extra deck so much. But if you want to be running the extra deck, of course, Super Dora and can't remember what the other one was, does very well in the deck because it allows us to burn and deal a ton of damage to our opponent for how much attack points they have. And this deck is just really, really effective and very fun to play as well. Very budget, so if you are on a budget, I'd highly recommend playing this deck. Next deck, we're going to have a look at ZODIAC, and ZODIAC is by far one of the most frustrating decks that I've played against so far this year. I was, as if you guys have seen any of my other videos, I was super hyped about this deck before it came out, and you know, in OCG before it even came out in OCG, when I found out about it, I was like, wow, I really want to make this deck. It looks really fun. And then when I found out it was destroying the OCG, I was like, shit, this deck is not going to be cheap. And I never got the opportunity to build it, so it was really upsetting for me. I really like this deck though, and like at the moment, this deck is kind of lost its essence at the moment because Rap here has now gone to 2, so the splashability of it has gone down, and now it's been power crept completely by Paleozoic. And although the deck is extremely effective, still it's not as good as it was. But it's still meta, and we still need to find cards that can actually counter this deck. The first card we're going to be looking at is the Necro Valley. Necro Valley has been errated, and the errata basically disallows your opponent in order to take cards from the graveyard altogether. So it's like once they're in the graveyard, they are dead until Necro Valley is gone. I would highly recommend siding this card, maybe at 2 or even 3 if you want to completely stun your opponent. I like this because it prevents what's called Rap here from coming back from the graveyard, so no more big boards before your turn, and just really just stuns your opponent and makes you think, shit, what am I going to do until I can get this card, get rid of this card. But my deck to watch out for actually goes to Shiranui again, and I know I'm very biased between this deck because I do love my Shiranui. But the reason why Shiranui comes onto this list is because it allows us to make an extremely big board before our opponent can. And loads of decks at the moment are kind of struggling when it comes to this. Of course, we've got DDDs who do very similar, but it's kind of rinse and repeat with what they do, and they're very, very reliant on their spell card, while Shiranui really aren't. They can do very, very well with Light Swans, which at the moment I'm using Light Swans in my Shiranui deck. If you'd like to see that, put in the description below, and I'll show you another updated deck profile. But you know, this deck is extremely strong, and with another cards that are coming out around the corner like Gozuki, you know, it makes the deck even stronger, and I think can even become like maybe a tier 2 deck or even a tier 1, depending on what you're against. But I'd really, really recommend playing this deck against Zoo, because this really does counter. So without further ado, let's go to the next one. Invokers, or Eidolon, whatever you want to call it. This deck is fresh and it is beautiful, but it's kind of the same as the Grasslet Green on how you can counter it, because they are very, very reliant on one card. Of course, these Grasslet Greener decks are very reliant on that grass looks greener, and the way we can actually counter this is by using a card called Prohibition. A Prohibition, if you don't know what it does, is you can just call a name of a card and prevent it from being used. So of course, if we're using Prohibition, we can use Prohibition and call this card, or we can call Invocation, and what this will do is completely stun our opponent until they can get rid of this card. And it's very underrated. I know loads of people that I've played against in the past actually use this card, and it's really, really good. Very good in rogue decks as well. So if you're against a top meta deck, I'd highly recommend siding this card, maybe just at 1 or even 2, if you're against these decks and you don't really know what to use to stun. But my deck to watch out for actually goes to Mars Heroes, and the reason for this is kind of obvious because of that grass looks greener, because the grass looks greener against Dark Law. If you have a Dark Law out first turn and your opponent draws the grass looks greener and wants to activate it, they're going to have to get rid of the Dark Law first. And with Totally Awesome still being at 3, this and Norded Not Banned and Bahamut Shark still being a thing, we can still make Totally Awesome, or even Rafflesia if you don't have the cards. But it just stuns our opponent until they can do something. And also does very well against Eidolons because, of course, Invocation cannot recycle itself, and most Invocation decks only run 2 Invocations, and so it will just get banished instead and not be able to recycle itself, which is what we want. We don't want our opponent to constantly be summoning these invoked cards because they are very frustrating to deal with. But I think this deck with Totally Awesome does very, very well, and I think with against Grasslick Screener and uh, and Invokes, it does really well. So I'd really highly recommend looking at Prohibition and Masked Heroes if you are looking for a deck or some cards that can counter. So some of us, of course, are on a budget. We're not all rich, and we all want a deck that can do very well. So I'm going to be showing you a few decks that I feel, well, top 3 decks that I feel are very, very strong and will still be effective after Link format comes out. Because Link format is coming around the corner, and of course, not everybody has the money just to come out and adapt. Some of these decks might not be the cheapest, but will still be effective. So if you decide to invest some money into these decks, they will still be good after Link Summoning comes out. So firstly, we've got Domain Monarchs, and a former deck that was storming the meta last year with extra deck Monarchs alongside when Ether the Heavenly Monarch was at 3, Stormforth was at 3, and Pantheism was at 3. These cards were disgusting, and the best part about this deck is it stuns our opponent completely. We don't need to use extra deck. We can use Domain of the True Monarchs and prevent our opponent from using the extra deck. So we stun our opponent, we can prevent special summoning with Vanity's Fiend, and Majesty's Fiend also does very well in this deck as well. Erebus doesn't target as well, so this is what we want. We want a deck that doesn't target, prevents our opponent from using their extra deck, and allows us to make big boards and really do well. And Stormforth and Pantheism, sure, they are at 1 each, but we can still use them, and what's it called? Return of the True Monarchs and Escalation is still good, although Escalation isn't exactly the best because, it's a trap card, but it still allows us to summon some cards like Vanity's Fiend, Aether, and Erebus on our opponent's turn, and this is what we really want. Red Layer in this deck does extremely well as well because it allows us to special summon it, then tribute it on the same turn, which is really effective. Next up we have Cosmos, and Cosmos, on my previous video, Cosmos came at number 5, and here it's going to come at number 2 because they don't need extra deck at all. And this is what I like about a deck. It doesn't need extra deck, it just allows us to play the pure no extra deck old school kind of way, which is really, really fun, and like, as you could probably see there, they float. You destroy them, and then there's another one that's going to come out. Dark Destroyer is at 1, shame, but it's still a very, very effective deck because nothing can be targeted, really. Infinity does very well, and sure, we are going to be summoning an extra deck monster if we do want to use Infinity, but this is the only extra deck monster that we're going to really want to use, so yeah, it's not really much that we can say towards this. I like this deck as well. It was really fun when I used to play it, when it was meta, but, it's still good. I still like it. But at number 1, we have Cyber Angels, a very old school type of card. Time of deck. This is a ritual deck, and I love the ritual decks back in the day when Necros were a thing. Like, all these decks were so much fun to look at. I mean, like, these cards are just so fun. We don't need extra deck. There's a lot of searching, and Herald of Perfection is a thing. Herald of Perfection is a huge pain in the ass to deal with because it's just going to help negate everything. Saphira also does extremely well, allows us to draw more and discard cards in our opponent's hand. It really does very well. And there's a ton of search power in this as well. We've got Cyber Patine Angel, Preparation of Rites, Pre-Preparation of Rites, Manju, all these sort of cards. There are loads and loads of cards that we can use. Also, I do have this deck myself, and I really do enjoy it. If you'd like to see a deck profile for this, smash that thumbs up button and put in the comment section below that you want to see a deck profile, and I'll be more than happy to do it, because I would really like to show you how much fun this deck is. Anyway, that is it for this video. If you enjoy this video, make sure to again smash that thumbs up button and subscribe for more. My name is Alex. We are around the corner from 100 subscribers again. I really wish that we could get that soon. Anyway, again, I'm Alex, and I am out. I'll see you guys later, and I hope you enjoy this video. Bye.